Cool. Hey. Cool. Hey. So, yeah, live once again. We've been doing these 360 tips and tricks for our awesome new ultra high res 360 rendering method. It's in alpha at the moment, and you're able to download it and test it and play with it for free. It's a method for getting incredibly high res 360 renders out of Unreal Engine. And over the past few weeks, I've been testing it out and figuring out best kind of optimizations, best way to get around certain caveats with 360 rendering in Unreal in general. And yeah, been sharing these tips weekly in this kind of hangout. So you can tune in for the live stream. You can also jump in the Discord as well, and even jump in and do a live session of figuring out your own scene. It's totally open for people to ask questions and generate discussion around all this stuff. But yeah, this week we're going to be looking at global illumination and exposure kind of settings to get your kind of colors to match your viewport, or not only matching your viewport, but giving you just a nice kind of clean image that you could then work in post in something like DaVinci or some other sort of color grading program. Yeah, we're looking at getting just a really nice clean image, and just going to look at mitigating some of the kind of things that come up when you first drop a 360 camera into the scene. Every scene is kind of different. Lots of scenes come out different, and also because this plugin's in alpha at the moment, there's been certain versions and things that react a little differently. So there might be things that I'm talking about here that we might think of a total different way of doing. So, the final result of our plugin may come out slightly differently to some of these tips that I'm giving here, but in the most up-to-date 5.4 version, this might even be a staging version that we haven't released yet, but it should be close enough to the current 5.4 version that we have out. This is how it's operating at the moment, and this is some stuff that we could, some ways to get your lighting really nice. So yeah, as I say, these are rules that kind of come up across the board with 360 rendering in general. It's not always things that are specific to our toolkit, but there are certain ways that we get around things that are different to, say, using Octane or Unreal Engine's panoramic renderer. It's got its own methods and it's got its own ways of doing things. So yeah, I'm in 5.4 at the moment with the most recent plugin, and I've just chucked a camera in the scene. With the most recent plugin, we actually attach a 360 capture actor to any cine camera. We don't use the 360 camera at the moment. This method just involves adding a 360 capture to any camera component. And this way, when we jump into movie render queue, and we go to render, I'm just taking a still at the minute, so I'm just taking 5 frames of just one position, just tracked one bit of transform. That's all. And when we go to render, we'll go add one of these, our 360 capture, and then it will just pick up the camera that has the 360 capture attached to it, and is just part of this take in the timeline. So you don't need to kind of ink drop and grab the 360 camera anymore. And then yeah, I'm doing equirectangular tests at the moment because it's really good for seeing where you might get seams. My final output is a 6K, just because it's a resolution that looks really nice once you zoom in, and it's kind of comfortable for my PC to put out. I think I got about 12K out of my 2070 Ti graphics card. Fairly new PC, but the graphics card's not that up to date, and I was still able to get like 12K out of this. So that's kind of the really exciting thing about this ultra high res rendering method, because it's all tiled and things. You can get really high res out of not the most powerful computer. So I'm doing 16 anti-aliasing samples. This just gives it a bit more of a smoother finish. And other than that, there's nothing else that I'm actually doing. I was messing around with some console variables for testing path tracer and stuff, but there's not much else that needs doing. You just add this 360 capture, do some anti-aliasing if you want to set your resolution and stuff. So I'm mostly just going to be jumping through some images in this one, just to show you like my process when jumping into this level. So first thing I did was just took a still render of a regular kind of front-facing camera. It's not a 360 image, it's just for reference for like the lighting, the contrast, the colors. So this is what I'm kind of trying to get as my final result. And it is really worth remembering that quite often with kind of professional filmmaking, you might actually not want a result like this to come out. You might want something that looks a bit more like if you're shooting raw with photography or filmmaking. Yeah, so something like this where you've got almost quite a flat color spectrum going on. I believe this would be the raw image. So these are quite good examples. You might often see it in filmmaking where an image comes out very, very washed out like this. Not a lot of tone variety going on here. But what's really good about getting this image is then you can take it into something like DaVinci Resolve or some other post color grading software. And if you've done the equivalent of this kind of shooting raw, you have a lot more room for color editing in post. You have a wider gamut of colors to be dealing with. It's kind of like if you start with this image and it's kind of compressed to this image, then once you change the curves or change the colors or something like that, you have a lot less to work with. Whereas with a very, I believe it's a wide gamut or like this kind of raw image, you have all the color data to work with afterwards. So in Unreal Engine, it's not actually raw footage that you're getting out of it. You'd be getting just straight linear color with no tone curve. But that is more kind of color space stuff that I'm going to go into in another video. But it's just a point that you might not necessarily want an image that looks like this. You might want something that looks a bit more raw or washed out. But as long as it has the full color information, then you can always pull it back to looking something like this, if not kind of more poppy. So you could work like that. That's the most professional way to work. But you could also kind of just try and get an image like this straight out and not do any post color grading. But again, we'll go into like colors next week or the week after. There's a whole method for your kind of color spaces and things like that. So yeah, I took this straight on image just to sort of get a bit of a reference of this is what the scene looks like. Then I dragged in the Unreal Engine, the Off-World 360 camera or a cine camera, added the capture component, and then checked out the render target here. Set a really low resolution just so it wouldn't take quite so long to load up. Made sure it's equirectangular, then kind of checked it out. And this is the image you get right off the bat. It actually looks really good through this render target, which is a little bit unexpected. Quite often you'd have some work to do in a level, but this level seemed to mesh well with our render target rendering method. So that's cool. But then when I did a test render through Movie Render Queue, it looks like this. So our aim with once we put this out is to have the render target preview looking as similar to the Movie Render Queue output as possible, because then it can act as a quick preview of what your colors are going to look like and things like that. But in this current state, there's something happening where we're not getting the exact same image from the render target as we are in the Movie Render Queue. And also it's worth mentioning that it's a whole different method of rendering. This Movie Render Queue method is actually totally different the way it's gathering the imagery to this render target one. So it's worth bearing in mind that it is just a total different thing. But if we can get it visually looking as similar to each other, then we can use it as that reference, which would be really great. And in some other levels, you can uh, use it as a reference a lot more. But for me, for this forest level, actually just wasn't working. So this, or like it wasn't looking the same. So this kind of slowed me down because I had to re-render every time to check this stuff out. But you can set it as a really low resolution and doesn't take massively long. But yeah, so this was my first render. It's a bit like, oh, we got some visible seams. We got some weird global illumination stuff going on. This is where you can see the front face of the camera, left face of the camera, right face of the camera. Then this back seam and this top and bottom, they're all meshing together quite nicely. But what it is just like each of these different cameras that's making up this image, each of these square renders, they're kind of seeing different things, and the images, the camera is reacting to what it's seeing in a different way because of its position being different. So the first thing I did to try and fix this initial issue is to set my exposure to manual. Exposure usually comes in to a game as this, when you open up a scene, it usually comes in as auto exposure histogram. And that's a method in games where as you're kind of walking outside or inside, your eyes would adapt to different levels of light that's all coming into your eye at once. So that's what these different faces are doing. They're adapting to, this one's looking at the sun more, so the whole screen is a bit brighter. So we don't want that. We want just one set of exposure across the board. So what you can do is in the Cine Camera Actor, you can set the exposure to manual. And this goes for both the owl capture and the camera component at the moment. I believe you need to set both of these to manual. Or no, this one doesn't have a setting for manual, so you need to do this in the camera component. That will carry through to the 360 capture. So you set that like here, go exposure, mirroring mode manual. And then at 0 it'd be really, really dark, so you need to up it to something like 8.5 for this scene. That worked for me. So yeah, that turning auto exposure off is kind of a must for this 360 stuff. It works for a front-facing camera. It doesn't work for 6 front-facing cameras stitched together in different directions. So yeah, the exposure can be controlled here, and they both respond, like they both add up. So you can either change it in the camera component or in the capture component. So what did I have here? I had, okay, no extra compensation here, and I had 8 compensation here. I think 8.5 was actually the best. Cool. So after upping that, we had this image, and this was before I upped the exposure. But we can see that a lot of the seams, it's a lot less dramatic, the seams that are going on here, so that's cool. Upping the exposure again, I managed to get to here. This is looking a lot better color-wise, but we've got this kind of global illumination problem here. Still getting some visible seams. And the main thing that caused this actually in the end was I actually turned it off by accident because I was like restarting things again and again, and I didn't realize I actually didn't save before this like restarted. But it's actually fog. It's fog density. So height fog is again something that can cause some of these issues due to the cameras facing different directions. So finding a height fog in your level and turning it off, especially if you don't have a very foggy level. This has just got some haze to it. This is with the fog on, you got a bit of haze. So for me, I'm like, that's something I can remove totally from the scene. perhaps even adding something in post. Because, you know, this seam is just really distracting. So I'd rather totally just turn the fog off. You might be able to find some balance between getting the fog right, but yeah, for me, that was something I could get rid of. The way I kind of found out that this was happening as well would be it's kind of just we turn on our global illumination. So what I was doing is I was just kind of pretending that I was this front-facing camera and then sort of looking up and being like, how does this differ camera to camera? I guess sort of to look at it, you might think this color stays the same all the way. But you could kind of see that if you're kind of looking into it from here, and then you look up at the trees, it's all a lot brighter here than it is here. So that's kind of what led me to going down the right track with that. And global illumination was contributing to that as well. But again, I don't think my scene was that hurt by turning off lumen in this instance. You just lose a little bit of this warmth, like this warm kind of tones, which again, we can add in post. So yeah, here's me turning off global illumination. And this was before I'd found the fog thing, so you're still getting a little bit of this. But it's fixing this kind of area and this kind of area. So you get a seam here. Okay, so maybe just this kind of area. But yeah, it's getting closer. This didn't help that much for this scene, but it's something that can help in some scenes is ray tracing ambient occlusion. So using ray tracing instead of lumen for the ambient occlusion. What did this clean up? I think this cleaned up. So for this one, you can see I accidentally turned lumen on again. But yeah, this didn't actually clean up much this time, but in some scenes this is really helpful. Then, yeah, quite an important one is turning off real-time capture in a skylight. This did fix this scene, it looks like. Yeah, pretty well. So this is all contributing to just getting rid of the really subtle seams. It's all contributing together. So yeah, real-time capture. Another quite important one. Here it looks like I remembered to turn off global illumination and set the skylight to not be real-time capture. And you can see turning off lumen, and if you look at these kind of trees and these kind of orangey areas, you do just lose a little bit of that. But for me, again, I was quite happy to do that for my scene in order to make the 360 render work, you know. So yeah, skylight off, skylight real-time capture off, and lumen global illumination off. Watch for this scene. Some other scenes you can get away with using lumen, but some scenes won't really be hurt by not using it. It's all very dependent scene to scene, but I just think it's useful to go through an example like this. So here it's looking really, really nice. This is where I remembered to turn the fog off again. I was literally stumped on this for ages. And then I was like, oh, I thought I'd already turned the fog off. And I was like, it can't be anything except fog. Like, look at that. That's clearly there's some fog happening. And then, yeah, I found that I'd had a crash while rendering or something, and I hadn't saved the level. So, yeah, fog was doing most of that, contributing there. Seam here and here. So that's looking really, really clean now. So next stage would be to render higher res. So I went to 6K after that point. So the details are looking really, really nice. I think 6K is a really good kind of testing resolution because you can really zoom in on it and see if the image kind of breaks up. It does for sure break up after a bit, and you know you're going to be really zoomed in if you're using this for VR or something, but it's a really good test. So here's the original, just forward-facing reference shot that we had, and here's the shot that we end up with. And just done a side by side here. See, the colors are not an exact match, but if you want to get really, really up close and personal with it, you could add a bit of a tone curve to get the sky to be a little bit deeper blue. And maybe some of these greens could be a little darker as well. But this could well be done with color grading, which I will go into in another session. And then just a bit of a side by side to see the kind of general color differences. But you know, in general, the fact that it's all intact, we've got no visible seams, is a big win for this render. So again, it's kind of different level to level, but for this scene and quite a lot of scenes, to be honest, these are the general tricks that you want to do really. This is just mentioning that I just had eight spatial samples for this one. Don't really need more than that. I was doing 16 for the ray trace to render. Cool, but yeah, in general, exponential height fog can cause issues. You can watch the video last week about if you really want fog in your scene, what you can do. Skylight, turning off real-time capture is a biggie. Checking if you can get away with turning off lumen. Real-time capture. Try out this ray tracing ambient occlusion. And then this auto exposure is a really key one as well. And yeah, those, anything else? I think it was just those and just upping the exposure a little bit or lowering it a little. All led to me getting an image I'm really happy with. I think there's almost a bit of a shadow in the sky here, so that's something I could look into. But overall, looking really good. So again, some levels will be different to others. Also got this really nice kind of Tokyo scene. I think this is free, or it was on free for the month before. But this is a really nice scene. It's a bit more stylized rather than realistic. So kind of had less, I think I had less issues with this one. For me, it was more like a case of when it first came in, it was a little overexposed. But again, this is differences with the different releases that we're bringing out. But what I ended up doing, because I was still getting a bit of a reflection seam here, this is all a seam. What I ended up doing was using, well, for one, this angle is totally like flawless. There's no seams, but just this angle was causing an issue. I'm pretty sure if I rotated it to look down this alleyway instead, I was getting less of a visible seam. So it's about the angle and stuff if you can like cater for shots that work in those areas. But what I ended up doing was using the path tracer. I'll show you the path tracer for the woods scene as well. So this is deferred renderer, like the normal renderer versus path tracer with 16 spatial samples. Path tracer actually got it pretty bang on with this scene. And if we zoom into the bit that was causing me issues here, you know, you got that. Path Tracer tidied it up quite well. It's got like a total different style in a way. You can see like all of these highlights are being picked up. I think there was a seam here as well I managed to fix. It's like again kind of reflection seams. But again, you kind of see this feel in the deferred render of this kind of raw footage. It's all quite flat. But what that means is it opens you up. If you started with this image, it'd be harder to go less uh, less vibrant. If you're starting with this image, it's easier to draw out, like add a tone curve, make it more vibrant. This is the idea of this kind of shooting raw thing. But it's really interesting to see these side by sides and how different renderers deal with different things. This is looking a bit more blurry in this kind of area, a bit more overexposed. It's when we really deep dive into Path Tracer, we can look at what's causing that. Get a bit more detail here. But this is kind of just an exposure thing, but it's really interesting how different these are. But there's certain things where if you are getting a really annoying seam and you don't know how to fix it, you can't change it with camera angles or certain settings, then we do always have the Path Tracer option. And Path Tracer in general seems really good for not having seams. So the Path Tracer for this one, for the woodland, kind of ended up looking a bit like this. Again, it's pretty nice, it's pretty crisp. I think this is some kind of glitch because of, some displacement or something that Path Tracer doesn't like, but I'm sure there's a console command to fix that. A lot of the foliage is missing as well, but I think there's also a console command to fix that. You're losing a lot of the bushes and things, but again, we can look deeper into optimizing levels for Path Tracer. But in general, we're not really getting any lighting and global illumination seams with Path Tracer. So aside from the funny quirks that it's got here, we're getting a nice image. And we are getting that haze, that fog. Getting a bit of noise around this kind of overexposed sunny area. But if you really wanted that haze, then maybe Path Tracer would be a good route. But yeah, we can look at Path Tracer in a bit more detail later down the line. But yeah, that's kind of my global illumination tips. This was just a comparison to the Unreal Engine panoramic capture. And I think there might be things I could do about this, but it's really interesting is like all of this is the right color, but the shadows are just really, really dark. I don't know what it's doing under the hood to figure out the image, but I don't know if just upping the exposure or lowering the contrast would necessarily fix this. I haven't looked into it too much, but yeah, it's just an interesting one about the panoramic, Unreal's panoramic. So any other comparisons I could show? Here's another panoramic compared to ours. So panoramic on the right. You get some kind of jagged edges here and there. Check out this bit here. In this scene, I was getting, some nastiness, and anti-aliasing didn't really seem to do anything about it. So this is a really good benefit of using our 360 capture. Just this image quality. And it's really visible up here as well. Ooh. jank this image comparison. Yeah, these bits, you know, it's a lot cleaner with that one. These are both 6K as well. And there might be a setting for enabling anti-aliasing in the panoramic capture, but I haven't been able to find it. Check out like up here as well. Yeah, really interesting difference there. Oh, we've got a bit of a scene there, actually. Oh no, maybe. Is that a seam? Can't even tell where that is in the image. Ah, here. Yeah, I think that is a seam. Very subtle one. But yeah, it's interesting. Doing these side by sides is really interesting. Just to see the differences in the different rendering techniques. It's interesting. This is when you bring in some anti-aliasing. It's probably also be visible in these areas. So this is no anti-aliasing override, so it does have FXAA, or is it fast approximate anti-aliasing by default? But you can add this override which lets you kind of tailor your anti-aliasing a bit more. There's not a lot in it. There's not a lot in it. It's just quite an interesting image quality difference. I think anti-aliasing kind of works on the edges of geometry. But yeah, it becomes like a real funny one of kind of really getting down to the nitty-gritty of what you prefer, what kind of image quality you prefer. I think here you got like quite an obvious example of where anti-aliasing is really nice. Just lose these kind of moire patterns. Get these like weird patterns where lines are really, really close together. Yeah, that smooths them over quite nicely. But yeah, cool. I think that's going to sum it up for this week. That was the stuff I wanted to cover really, was just the kind of exposure and kind of losing any seams that you might get in global illumination and exposure for this woodland scene anyway. There might be other things that come up with different scenes, but yeah, thanks very much for hanging out for this one. And yeah, we might go into some color stuff next week or some other 360 tips. Cheers.